Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Mortal Kombat, the original film. So, going into this, it's kind of really interesting to watch this film just because a lot of people will scoff and like ha 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 about the special effects or some kind of approaches that they went with this movie and stuff like that. And a lot of people will be like, hey man, this movie still holds up and it's still a great iconic film and blah 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 blah. Like a lot of people will love this movie compared to anything else. I would say honestly to a lot of people, I would honestly say like Mortal Kombat Legends Scorpion's Revenge was a really great Mortal Kombat movie, and it honestly feels like a an echo of this film as well as a copy and paste of what is to have the Mortal Kombat 2021 like become, because they realize, you know what, man, there's bits and pieces of that movie that actually seemed like a really good and solid idea. How about we just steal some stuff from that film and just and make our own little ditty and it'll work out. So going into going into this film, I kind of like the fact that because I just think it's just kind of like odd how we have these characters that they don't have to be motivated by the fact that, hey, like if your realm loses, like your realm is gone. No, they have to get like motivated by the fact that, like, well, no, like you all have to face all of your fears. Every single one of you have to be like Bruce Wayne. Like all of you have to like fight a bat or something. Like because you aren't afraid of anything else. You're just afraid of a bat. So you have to like conquer that fear. And like I just kind of find that interesting in this movie, that they're trying to build investment of every single one of these characters, because reasonably they're also trying to sell at this point in time Mortal Kombat in a different medium. When kind of looking at characters like Scorpion and and some of the other people in this film that have changed over a number of decades and whatever what have you, in a number of years, I mean, it's kind of interesting to see like a character like Scorpion in this movie, where we end up having it to where Scorpion ends up having a kind of like a Venus flytrap-ish like plant thing coming out of his hand, going to attack people. I think the good thing that we have in the other movies compared to this one is it seems like for the most point we end up having a story that ends up helping us understand how the fights are formed. Where in this film, it's just like, well, hey, like, it's a tournament, so anybody should just fight anybody. We end up having it to where, okay, well, why is Scorpion having to fight Johnny Cage? Was there a whole, like, story that we missed somewhere that was going to have a reason for these two butting heads? No, it's just, well, defending realms, so you kind of have to. Like, we had no reason why eventually Sub-Zero is fighting Liu Kang or whatever. It's just, well, defend that realm and so on and so forth. Here's also an interesting thing. There have been numerous different versions of Mortal Kombat, which I found really interesting. We end up having a Mortal Kombat live action show that I think was called Mortal Kombat Conquest, which I thought was interesting, and I want to try to figure out how exactly I can find and start watching this, because I thought it was just Like Mortal Kombat, a live action show? Huh? Interesting. Uh, and there was also a Mortal Kombat Defenders of the Realm, like animated, like cartoon of Mortal Kombat. And I was like, so what now? I'm like, I think I remember watching like an episode here or two of this, but I never really quite could grasp it or understand why they made a cartoon of Mortal Kombat. And then eventually I ended up through Movie Pro, which is how I ended up seeing this original Mortal Kombat. Uh, I ended up watching The Defenders of the Realm, and I was like, this is just the weirdest show. We end up having all these Mortal Kombat characters fighting all of these, these tech-esh like soldiers, and we have like this Nightwolf-esh like character who's in this bat cave that is telling all of the other Mortal Kombat characters like what's going on and so forth, giving them like the heads up about things. I'm just like, say what now? I'm like, what is all of this stuff? Like, I remember Mortal Kombat just being a tournament like thing. Uh, we have it to where in the animated film, like Scorpion's Revenge, the Scorpion's Revenge film feels very much reminiscent to this movie, but then and tries to, I think, one up it. But I also think there are copying and pasting and stealing some of the stuff from this from Scorpion's Revenge and using it in the newer Mortal Kombat 2021. Um, and so like I think Scorpion's Revenge is probably the best Mortal Kombat movie, but really a lot of people would just be disinterested with watching an animated film. And then plus like this the Scorpion's Revenge is much more gorier than anything else that you're gonna see. But I just find it just more comedic and just really fun. So also knowing there was these kind of garbagey Mortal Kombat movies also. There was like Mortal Kombat Legacy, and like they try to incorporate some of the former Mortal Kombat characters and stuff along those lines. So with that said, let's now that we've kind of gotten everything out there, there's also, of course, Mortal Kombat Annihilation, which a lot of people just think is a joke. Like that movie was such a garbage that like no, like that movie was honestly being really smart because they were trying to figure out how to much more maybe merchandise the sequel movie, and also reasonably they found out how much money that they made from this movie, and so they went into the sequel basically just going like, well, man, let's try and make more money, and that's all that mattered. To where they were probably driving it home that they were probably only going to make 2 installments, and that was going to be it. So the second movie was just like, well, okay, well, we still have that first one that people are going to remember for years to come. So who cares about this sequel? Let's just get it out there just to have a tax write off. So now that I've gotten everything out there, done my research, and so on and so forth, so yeah, like I find this movie fairly interesting. We have a pretty good cast of characters that are all in their own right very intimidating people. We have it to where within this movie, I honestly really enjoy Goro in this movie. We have it to where Goro actually has a personality in this film, and he is of course a very intimidating character. Where I think in all the other iterations that end up happening within any of these things, it's just Goro is just to show up to fight somebody, probably die, and then like that's all he's there for. Which immediately I'm like, man, like, that is a waste of a perfectly, like, iconic character that I'm like, man, like, you should have built an entire movie up with Goro. But instead, like, no, now he's just a character that just arrives and beats somebody up and then, of course, dies. And every single iteration, that's just what he's there for. Whereas in this movie, this guy actually has lines. This guy is to be intimidating and so on and so forth. And you would have thought that that should not have happened with this character because of the limitations of, like, how hard this was going to be to do any number of these things, but instead, like, it comes off to look freaking awesome. So, going into this, let's go into spoilers. If anything, there's going to be at some points in time some kind of like give and take within the review of this film, because you kind of have to do some setups and stuff like that of like, oh, okay, well, this journey to have gotten this person to this spot and this journey to this person getting to this spot and so on, so forth, and whichever. Like, reasonably, I kind of I like the fact that they limit to have us only invest in three characters. Where, like, I think once we get down to like sequels and all kinds of stuff, they try to like, well, hey, like now you have to invest in these like six characters, and I'm like, why? Why? Like, I should have only invested really and truly in one character, but really always that character fell to probably be Johnny Cage. No offense to Liu Kang, which uh, like he should really be the character you're just like, well, yeah, but Liu Kang is always gonna win in the end. So why invest in anybody but Liu Kang? Because he's always gonna be the one that wins in the end. Like, that's the thing. Like, invest in anyone else because, like, you know that, like, you know how the story is going to end. So really just find a character that you're going to have fun with along the way. Like, even if it's a character like Reptile, where in this movie, like, the special effects, eh, but but what a fun character. Like, invest in that. Find the fun in every single character and like and enjoy the movie that way instead of enjoying the obvious journey that you're going to tie yourself onto and so on and so forth. So, let's go into spoilers if I haven't already. So let's get that into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. So, I feel like there was something that, like, I always, like, when there's a movie that could quite possibly be very complicated or whatever, I feel like I didn't give myself enough time in the cryptic sense to kind of build this movie up. Um, but yeah, but I find this movie just fascinating. So, spoilers now. So, let's talk about Liu Kang because obviously, if I hadn't already said that, like, well, like, Liu Kang is basically the guy that just comes in there and is just like, man, I'm gonna be like the best looking like fighter character, and like I'm gonna be shirtless through like 90% of this movie probably, or a lot of the times I'm gonna have like a cut sleeve shirt or whatever to look great. So we have it to where Liu Kang had a nightmare of his brother being grabbed by Shang Tsung, and I believe his brother's name is Chan. We end up having Chan being grabbed by Shang Tsung by the head, and we have to where Shang Tsung is telling Liu Kang, like, you're next. And that Shang Tsung is shaming Liu Kang for just letting his brother die. And so we have Liu Kang who wakes up. He's a very sweaty dreamer. And so we have Liu Kang waking up to go to a Western Union letter or telegram or whatever that is to say, brother dead, come home, see you later, alligator, whatever. And so we have it to where I'm like, okay, wait a minute. So did Liu Kang read the letter and then sleep? Or and then woke up with the nightmare and then had to reread the letter? Or did Liu Kang psychically know that his brother was getting killed off by Shang Tsung? And so he woke up going like, dude, I gotta read this letter because I know that someone is going to tell me that my brother is dead, to where I still don't need to read this letter. But we have it to where, like, it just sets up the story better, I guess, either way. I want to have Liu Kang do the double take thing going on, where he read the letter and it was like, well, F it, I'm going to go to sleep. And then he goes to sleep, has the nightmare, and then he's like, well, wait a minute, I need to, like, really read this letter again to make sure that my brother is dead for the second time around, so then I could just grieve somehow instead of, like, grieving in my sleep. So we have Liu Kang going back to his homeland, his home place, and so we have it to where Liu Kang is, you know what, he's just like high-fiving everybody, and like he's flexing his muscles onto everybody, just like, yeah, like, look at me, like, yeah. No, we have it to where Liu Kang is going back to the land of the monks, and we end up having it to where Lord Raiden has to arrive to Liu Kang and basically mention, like, well, hey, man, like, your brother's dead, so, like, you're up, buddy. You're on deck. Like, you have to go to the tournament because, like, you're, like, you were the guy that was supposed to go, and you ran away, so Chang had to take your place. And so, yeah, like, technically, Chang's death is, like, your freaking fault there, buddy. And so Liu Kang is like, well, like, I guess I should go back to get my revenge. Like, we have it to where Liu Kang is just kind of, like, going through the motions. Like, he's not... Like, he's doing this because, like, others are telling him, it's like, well, it's the right thing to do. And I think that's why Liu Kang had ran away before. To where, like, the world has, like, basically told him what to do probably his entire life. To where Liu Kang now is going to have to accept what the world is, like, telling him to do. Like, his nightmares are telling him what to do. And Liu Kang is just like, well, I guess I should just, like, go ahead and do it. Like, finally, I'll just do it. So that way he'll just shut everybody up. And just, like, I won't have Lord Raiden come knocking at my door just saying, like, hey, buddy. Do you still want to do this, like, tournament thing to the death? Do you have any time on your hands? So Liu Kang goes off onto the boat to make his way to this tournament. So now we have to go and set up all the other characters. So we have Sonya, who in this movie I would assess is some kind of detective of sorts, or maybe she's a private eye that is to end up have her eye on a guy named Kano. And I say that jokingly because, of course, Kano only has, like, the one eye and then the other, like metal red-eyed thing that doesn't have any superpowers in this movie. Like, it's just a silver metal thing and just like a red weird looking, like as if he like got some like metal plate over his face or whatever. Like, they don't justify the whole like how he got that or anything in this movie. It's just like, oh, he has that. Okay, he just looks different. So I would have wished that they would honestly would have like justified it towards like, hey, we'll find out like this guy is like half of a metal face, and like bizarrely he ended up like being experimented on as a kid. Like, there's no lead up to why why Kano is the way he is for us to like be invested in Kano for to where eventually Sonya is going out of her way to take him down. Like, I don't think we just like. I think we get Kano, who is a very intimidating person, and you can kind of just tell that he is pushing people's buttons, even to the point of like Kano going and talking to Goro and just saying like, "Well, hey man, like I'm kind of a boss of an underworld too. Like, yeah, like I'm just as good as you are, Goro." And Goro's like, "Oh yeah, oh really? Well, I'm gonna come over here, just knock over your wine there. Just see what you do there, buddy." Like, where Goro or Kano is just consistently like eating off of this turkey drumstick, and it's just like he's biting into it and he's just chewing on the pieces. Yeah. And he spits the pieces out. What are you doing there, buddy? You're wasting perfectly good turkey by spitting the pieces out. Like, I don't get it. Like was the food not cooked, and so they had to like justify that it's like, well, like this guy just like can't find a pack of gum, so he just decides a drumstick will do with turkey on it, and just like yeah. Like, I have to consistently eat this turkey but not actually swallow it. I am so confused. So anyways, so we'll get past that eventually. Some millions and millions of years that didn't just quite process with me. So I just don't get that whole drumstick part. It makes no sense. But anyways, so we have it to where Sonya has this, like, she has this hard on for Kano. She is just like, I don't know what it is, but we have it to where Sonya is just like dead set on getting Kano. Like, I think there was like some small story where like Kano ended up killing I think Sonya's maybe previous partner, and now Sonya is now tied to Jax. And so honestly, if they would have just laid out that entire scene to where like Kano killed Sonya's old partner, and so now she's thrusted with Jax, and so now Sonya is all miserable, and so that is what's driving her to eventually have every single one of her partners eventually lead to almost death. Pretty much. But anyways, so we have Sonya, who is to do a raid onto Kano's place of sorts. And so we end up having Shang Tsung talking to Kano to like basically say, it's like, well, hey, you know Sonya is coming for you, so if anything, like, make yourself scarce, because like we want this girl at the tournament, so like make yourself scarce there, bucko. And so we end up having Sonya planning a raid on Kano for Kano to slip out of her fingers, to where Kano is going to be at this boat, and so Sonya has to track with Drax Kano down to this boat, to where eventually she has to get on this boat to find Kano. And so now we have to set up the best character in Mortal Kombat, Johnny Cage. I don't know why I like Johnny Cage so much. Like, I just think that he is just kind of the comedic relief in this movie. And also, we have it to where, like, in several different iterations of Johnny Cage, like, he's just a fun character. Like, especially the Joel McHale version of Johnny Cage is just really funny. To where he keeps getting like hitting the junk, and we have it to where the entire time, like, Johnny thinks that this entire thing is all a movie, but it's all not. In the Scorpion's Revenge version, just hilarious. So going into this version, you have it to where this Johnny Cage is still set up really, really good. And I really, really enjoy this Johnny Cage. And, like, it's just a shame that the 2021 film is missing something, obviously. And so eventually we're hopefully going to maybe have a sequel with that film. But anyways, so going into here, so Johnny Cage. So we end up having Johnny Cage, suit and tie, arriving onto the scene where we end up having a bunch of guys all arrive to fight off Johnny Cage. And so they're all in these suit and ties, and they all have all of a sudden just a variety of different weapons, whether it's nunchucks, whether it's whatever. So we end up having all of these guys just coming at Johnny Cage, and he ends up taking down every single one of them, to the point to where eventually Johnny Cage is left with one guy. And so this one guy is basically no-selling Johnny Cage's attacks, to where reasonably this one guy is continuing to fight Johnny Cage no matter what, to where Johnny Cage eventually tells the goon, it's like, this is where you're supposed to fall down. And so we end up having the goon perfectly standing up, and to where he just jumps off to the side and just, like, makes it look like he falls down. And we end up having Johnny Cage, like, yelling, "Cut!" Like, come on, like, where are you guys getting these guys? Like, really? It's like, yeah, like, they aren't even, like, they should know what their cues are to know exactly when they should fall. So we have it to where we have a director that I guess was supposed to look like Steven Spielberg. I guess supposedly Steven Spielberg was actually supposed to be doing a cameo in this movie, but Steven Spielberg was probably just like, F that, like, I'm not actually going to do that movie for a little cameo. Like, no, like, I'm not going to do that. And so we really have it to where they had to, like, find a guy that looked like Steven Spielberg. So we have it to where, like, this director is trying to put Johnny at ease, to just say, like, well, yeah, like, we'll figure out something, we'll fix things in post, it'll be great, Johnny. And Johnny Cage is like, yeah, okay, sure. And so we have it to where Johnny Cage meets his old sensei, Master Boyd. And so Master Boyd ends up telling Johnny Cage, it's like, well, hey, man, like, you look amazing in these films. It's like, man, like, you're a star. But you know what? Your whole entire life, people are going to tell you that, like, yeah, man, that you're a fake. Like, you're doing everything to try to prove them wrong, but you just can't, you just can't stop the naysayers. You just can't stop the hate. You just can't stop people telling you that you're faking things. Like you're probably faking your bedroom businesses late at night, I'm sure. No. That's not what happens in the movie, but I just had to add it in because it was a joke. So Johnny Cage is like, well, yeah, like everyone tells me that that I'm faking all of my fights, that I really can't actually take anybody down, and like everybody just assumes that I'm not really doing what I'm doing. And so we end up having Master Boyd going like, well, you know what? Here's a way to finally like shut everybody up and to like prove to everybody that like what you're doing is real, like how to make yourself more authentic. How about you go on to this tournament and prove everybody wrong? And so Johnny Cage is like, yeah, you know what? Sounds like a great idea. Like it sounds like the right thing to do. And so here's the thing though, we end up having like Johnny Cage with like a million things of luggage all making his way to this boat. And so we end up having Johnny Cage bumping into this other martial artist, where it seems that this other martial artist is to seemingly right away like take a liking to Johnny Cage, and like it's like, yeah, man, like you're doing great stuff, like it's really great what you're doing, like I really buy everything seems really authentic. Johnny Cage is like, well, yeah, man, like it's great. And so we end up having a tie between both of these characters. And so we end up having it to where I'm trying to find uh the guy that was with yeah, we're not gonna be able to find him. Great. So that guy that Johnny ends up making like good friends with, because he ended up seeing him in some tournament somewhere where he ended up being successful. We eventually have this guy end up being the warm up match for Goro, and like that has got to be like a pretty good fight between, like, story wise, a good investment that ends up doing a pretty good payoff, which ends up getting Johnny Cage to, of course, go the way he goes into this movie, but we'll get there. So and so when I prep up for when this is going to happen, like you'll understand where I'm coming from, where the journey I'm making here is. So we have it to where Johnny Cage goes and gives Liu Kang a big wad of money, and is like, "Well, hey man, like, uh, like you guy, you can take all of my luggage and put it on the boat. Like, I'm gonna give you a big fat wad of money, and so you go and take all of my luggage and you bring it onto that boat." And we have it to where Liu Kang is like, "Wow, yeah, like I think I'll help you out with your luggage." And so we have Liu Kang, who ends up taking the big fat wad of money, putting it in his pocket. And so Liu Kang ends up taking one thing of Johnny Cage's luggage and tossing it overboard. And we end up having Johnny Cage is like, well, luckily I didn't ask him to park my car, because he would have freaking put that in the river as well. So we have this boat coming in, and so we end up having everyone scrambling onto the boat, especially Sonya, because she's like, where is Kano? Where is he? So we now have it to where both Sonya, Johnny, and Lou are all seemingly commingling on the boat together. They're all trying to figure out like where they're even going, because like they look at a compass and the compass is just like So we end up having them try to figure out where exactly they are, and they can't quite figure it all out. So we have it to where Shang Tsung is to show himself upon these fighters. And so we end up having, of course, how Liu Kang is like, well, like, I'm definitely going to challenge you to Mortal Kombat. Just you wait, Shang Tsung is like, yeah, whatever. It's going to happen. Like, eventually, towards the tail end of this movie, it's going to happen. So we have it, of course, where Shang Tsung is talking smack to Lord Raiden, and Lord Raiden is doing vice versa. And like we have it to where there's like this moment between these two characters where they're kind of shaping everybody up to just kind of see uh, like the sides that are going to be chosen. It seems that we eventually have Shang Tsung, who wants to get this tournament to go off right away, right onto this boat, and we end up having it to where Lord Raiden, of course, with his just like, like, no, like, we gotta do this the right way, and we gotta do this like the normal Mortal Kombat way, which is, of course, like on an island, and with eventually people just choosing whoever they want to fight eventually anyways. Like, there isn't eventually any structure at some point. But anyways, so we go off of this boat to eventually have all these guys eventually go upon this or these smaller boats. And the funniest thing we end up seeing is Johnny Cage with like 20 different things of luggage all on his shoulders, and he can't even get off the small boat to get on land. And so he ends up just falling into the falling onto this beach and just plows right into the ground with all of this luggage, and it just looks hilarious. But I feel so bad for him. So we end up having Johnny Cage, who is to try and trot all of this luggage now up these giant flights of stairs. And so while this is going on, we one by one have like Johnny starting to lose his luggage one by one. And so Liu Kang is like, do you need some help with that? Like, do you need some help with some luggage? Like, good God, buddy. Like, so, but it's just freaking hilarious how like we have so much luggage that Johnny Cage has, but then slowly but surely, once they make it to the actual like inside this temple-esh like thing that they are in, we just have Johnny Cage with like one little thing of luggage. And so it's like, man, like he went from like 20 things of luggage to now there's like one little thing, which I found to be hilarious. So we go on to have, of course, these guys, I guess, like find their rooms and figure out where they're gonna train and where they're gonna get ready. And so you eventually have all the Mortal Kombat people eventually go on to eat their dinner, their din. And so we eventually have it to where Shang Tsung is to interrupt their dinner to just be like, well, like, I need to really show you guys, like, what Mortal Kombat really means, kind of thing. And so we end up having all of Shang Tsung's henchmen kind of like flinging tables and pushing people out of the way, to where we have these henchmen all lining up to kind of make this like little like setup to where we are to see Sub-Zero fighting this one henchman-like person that is taking 2 years to like shadow box and kick his way and all kinds of craziness. so that way he can just be like, yeah, like I'm definitely gonna be able to take this guy down. And so while we have this guy going and kicking 7 to 85 times, and then punching 80 to 500 times, to where eventually by the time that he's probably going to actually fight Sub-Zero, he's already probably going to be winded. So we have it to where this henchman goes and does this flying kick to Sub-Zero, and so Sub-Zero ends up doing his ice wind-up, to where eventually he ends up like firing off this ice ball that ends up completely and utterly freezing this henchman, to where he ends up just crashing into Shang Tsung into pieces, and then you just see his like mostly just his like head that ends up getting fallen onto Shang Tsung's feet, and so he's like flawless victory. And so we end up having the fighters just going like, whoa, like, man, I wasn't prepared for superpower, people. Yeah, this sucks. So we end up finding out that, of course, Shang Tsung's champion is Goro, and he's undefeated. He's never, of course, undefeated means, of course, never been beaten, whatever, and so on and so forth in a match before. So we end up having Shang Tsung just like, yeah, like, you've never beaten my champion. You're never going to beat my champion. So, whatever. So we end up having it to where there are some like first round like fights, and so we end up having immediately where Johnny Cage's friend is to end up fighting Goro, and we have it to where like this is a really awesome fight, because this really sets up Goro to be this really cool looking character. He's really intimidating, and it really sets up that like Goro is just gonna crush this guy, because this guy is a really good actor, and this Goro creature is just set up really well. So we have it to where Johnny Cage's friend just starts pummeling this thing, and we have it to where, of course, like, Goro is just like, like, should I take him now, Shang Tsung? Should I take him now? And so we have to where Shang Tsung kind of gives him, like, come on, like, just go ahead. Like, just, like, I want my soul. Like, so, because we end up finding out that Shang Tsung has all of the souls of all the defeated people all within him, so he's kind of like this soul collector. So we end up having it to where, of course, like, Goro has these like big hits to where like we consistently see that Johnny Cage's friend in this scenario is just having like these Tweety Bird like moments of just getting full on like rocked, to where we have it to where like Johnny Cage and like Liu Kang and like Sonya is like, dude, you got this, like, you got him on the ropes, like, all you need to do is just like try to hit him, like, try to get him, you got him. And so this guy is like, and so like you could just see he's just like, I don't know what's going on. And so we have it to where Goro, like, even when this guy is getting some decent hits, Goro eventually just gets to a point to where it's just one move and this guy is just taken down, to where we have it to where Goro just punches him way too often, to where this guy is just he can no longer take the onslaught of this character. And so we end up having it to where Goro ends up picking up this guy to hold as tribute to Shang Tsung. And so, like, Shang Tsung is like, dude, this guy is dead. This guy is over. So I'm just going to consume him. And so we end up having, of course, Johnny Cage just going like, mother effer, like, he took my best friend. He took my friend. I need to seek revenge. He took my friend that I barely knew and just had like some kind of moment with before. Like, I need to avenge this guy that I barely knew. So, like, I think that gets really interesting when eventually Johnny goes into like, I'm gonna fight Goro because we have to do this. Like, it's really interesting. So we end up having, after this fight, that we end up having Liu Kang, Sonya, and Johnny Cage kind of really in fear because they're like, man, like, how are we going to be able to take down like a thing like Goro? Like, this seems impossible. And we have it to where Lord Raiden is like, no, like, it's not actually impossible. Like, you just have to come into this fight with some kind of strategy. Like, if anything, like, you guys have a fear that you have to conquer to realize that you can really and truly do this. Like, you need to really and truly believe in yourselves to win these fights. And so we end up having, of course, Lord Raiden mentioning how Johnny is so easy to run into a fight. But we end up having it to where, like, Johnny Cage has to learn that, like, he has to fight for the right reasons. Because a lot of the times, like, Johnny Cage fights for his own, like, for himself. Like, he fights for, like, his own selfish reasons. And so he needs to look beyond that. And so we end up having also, like, Lord Raiden telling Sonya, it's like, well, you need to have a heart. Like, it's like the Wizard of Oz moment towards the tail end of the movie. It's like, well, hey, you need courage and you need a heart and you need a this and you need a that. So we have Lord Raiden telling Sonya, it's like, you need to admit that you need help. Like, you can't go into everything alone. You need to realize that you need help. And so we end up having Liu Kang, who has to know what his greatest fear is that he needs to accept his destiny. That it seems like the world has bent over backwards for Liu Kang, that he needs to have all this stuff that the world has bent over backwards for him. He needs to God, what is the perfect word to say this? The world ended up bending over backwards for him, and so Liu Kang has to acknowledge that and say, like, okay, well, like, since the world has done so much work for me, then I have to repay all of that back by accepting the fact that, like, now I have to do everything that the world has told me that has been building up for so long to tell me that I need to do this, so I need to accept that I need to be the world's, or in this case, the realm's champion, and so on and so forth. Everybody has to fight their fear, so we end up having immediately that now we have some interesting fights going on here. So we end up having some preparation fights that, of course, go easily down for the most point. We end up having Liu Kang fighting some God. What is his title in this thing? He is some monk fighter, or no, he's a temple monk, I think is his title. We end up having Liu Kang, of course, fighting some temple monk, which he easily goes down, and so Shang Tsung ends up consuming this guy that is fighting for his side. And so we end up having this all being prepared to have Sonya end up fighting. She ends up fighting Kano, and so we end up having Sonya, like the fight between her and Kano. We have Kano who ends up bringing a blade into the fold, which is to be intimidating, to basically say like, well, hey, like this is the exact same blade that I stuck your partner with, so like yeah, like this is to get you all angry and upset and like to get you to want to like fight even harder. And so we have it to where Sonya ends up going and just beating the living crap out of Kano to the point of Sonya ends up putting her like legs around Kano and dropping him, to where we end up having Kano going like, whoa, 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 wait a minute, like, can you give me a break? Could we stop? Could we whatever? And we end up having it to where Sonya's like, sure, I'll give you a break, and then she just snaps his neck, and we end up having Shang Tsung was like, well, yeah, like I'm going to consume his soul too, because he's a stupid schlub. And he's just a guy that eats a drumstick and like he just like chews it and spits it out. That makes no sense. So on and so forth. So we end up having Johnny Cage challenging Goro, and we have it to where Shang Tsung accepts this challenge, but with a cost, to where Shang Tsung says, well, I want to be able to challenge whoever I want to challenge at the very tail end of this tournament. Because if Johnny Cage is going to take down Shang Tsung's champion, quite possibly, then Shang Tsung wants to be able to challenge whoever he wants by the tail end of this competition. And reasonably, we are to assess that it's like, oh yeah, well, Shang Tsung is easily just going to go after Liu Kang, because really that should have been the fight that they were going to have anyways. So we have it to where we have a fight between Kitana and Liu Kang. And so we have it to where Kitana is telling Liu Kang like what he'll need to be able to do to conquer the next fight. That he needs to realize the elements that are around him and something along those lines to be able to defeat his next fighter. And we have it to where Liu Kang is kind of like baffled and confused because like, what are you even talking about? Like, dude, I'm fighting you right now. What the heck are you even talking about? Because we have it to where Kitana ends up seeing Liu Kang, Johnny Cage, and Sonya all arriving into this temple. And so Kitana ends up looking on at these people, and we end up having Shang Tsung, who's seeing Katana look at these people, and he's like, yeah, you better not say one single word to any of these Earthrealm people, and I'm gonna make sure that Reptile follows you around with his bad CGI to to make sure of it. So, anyways, we have it to where Kitana just yields against Liu Kang, and so that fight is over. So we have the next fight, which is, of course, Johnny Cage versus Goro. And this is probably the best fight of this entire movie because we have it towards a strategy fight, not just like, oh, well, I just have to kick a bajillion times to win this whole thing. So we have it to where Johnny Cage tells Sonya and Liu Kang is like, dude, I have a plan. Like, I figured this whole thing out. And so we end up having Johnny Cage coming in, sunglasses and all, and going in there and just trying to be as intimidating as he can possibly be. So we have it to where Goro comes in there. He's like, yeah, it's like, you know, all kind of like craziness, and like we have it to where like the music is trying to make him look scary and blah 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 blah. So we end up having Goro, who sees Johnny's sunglasses. He ends up taking them from him, and he ends up crushing them into his hands. And so we end up having Shang Tsung is like, yeah, like, let's begin. And so immediately we end up having, because there's this cool moment to where everyone was questioning why Johnny Cage was going after Goro because Goro was undefeated, and Johnny Cage like chews their head off because he's like we have to take the fight to them, like we have to do this, like we have to win for our realm, like we have to like. And Lord Raiden is like, "Ah, my little childrens who realize they figured it out. They've grown. How fast have they grown?" And so we have to where Johnny is like, "Dude, like I got this. Like I have it planned." And so we have it to where Shang Tsung is like, "Let's begin." And so immediately we have it to where Johnny Cage does the splits and frickin' punches Goro right in the sack to where Goro is just like, ooh, he's like falling over almost, and he's like, ooh, it's like, and we have it to where like Shang Tsung is like, you idiot. And so we have it to where Johnny Cage is just like, he's running off and he's like, oh my god, my hand. Like that guy's junk is just, oh. So we end up having Johnny like running off, and Shang Tsung is like, dude, like follow him. Like go and kill him for what he's just done. And so we have Goro, who is trying to like climb up this thing to make it to Johnny. And so we end up having like Johnny like on the edge of this like cliff edge like thing, and he is like preparing for when Goro is to get here. And so we end up having Goro just like going like, where is he? And so immediately we have it to where Johnny comes popping off to the side and just like, those were $500 sunglasses, you asshole. And then frickin' kicks him, and he's just like caught off guard, and he's like, whoa. And so like Goro is trying to like, he's already like had to adjust with the nut shot, but then on top of that, like he's just consistently caught off guard by Johnny Cage, to where eventually we have it to where Johnny Cage with his punches and his kicks and everything along those lines just ends up pushing Goro off of this ledge, to where like Johnny Cage is thinking like, well, hey, maybe he fell off and maybe he's dead. No, like Goro with like one hand is just like holding on. He's like, "Ugh," and so we end up having to where Johnny Cage is like, well, this is the part where you fall down, and so we end up having Goro just like not being strong enough. He's starting to lose his grip, and so he ends up falling, and he ends up falling to his death, which is like hands down like the best part about this whole entire movie is just this one interesting fight out scene. So we we move on to basically how Shang Tsung just be all like, they took my champion and they killed him. So we end up having Shang Tsung in his bitterness taking and grabbing uh, Sonya and like saying that he's like, well, since I have the ability of now challenging whoever I want, well, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna take Sonya and I'm gonna go and fight her towards the finale of all of this. So we end up along the way having Liu Kang and uh, going and having to fight out the reptile and scorpion and Sub Zero to make their way uh, to getting to Shang Tsung. So we end up having both Liu Kang and Johnny Cage going into this portal uh, to follow Shang Tsung, and so we end up having, of course, Johnny Cage and Liu Kang getting separated. So we have it to where Liu Kang ends up uh, finding Reptile somewhere in the shadows, and so Liu Kang ends up grabbing Reptile and ends up fighting Reptile. And here's where we get this special uh, like multiple kick like fight attack that of course Liu Kang is iconically known for. And so we end up having it to where this whole interesting fight scene just ends up with uh, Liu Kang doing this multiple kick thing, which ends up kicking this reptile onto uh, being out of the place in which they are at, to where he ends up falling to his death, to where eventually the reptile ends up like leaking all of these bugs and all kinds of things. And so the little monster inside the reptile ends up trying to get out, and we have it to where Liu Kang ends up crushing the little monsterish thing that's inside this body. And so we end up having Liu Kang regrouping with Katana. So we end up having Johnny Cage having to forcibly fight out with Scorpion. And so we end up having this like acrobatic looking thing to where Johnny has to do all of the like this acrobatic looking like spinning thing, and then eventually he has to like grab onto uh these parts to like make himself get even higher and higher up. Like it's craziness, this whole fight out. And of course we end up having it to where like at first like Liu Kang is in this like forest with Scorpion, where Scorpion of course is to like release uh the weapon that ends up coming from out of his hand. And so we end up having Scorpion trying to release this thing, but we have to where Johnny Cage eventually used the force to his advantage, and eventually these scorpions weaponry thing ends up landing into a tree, which then Scorpion just decides it's like, well, hey, I'm going to just retract this thing. And while he's retracting the thing, Johnny Cage decides to hit him, so he will be able to like just be able to like think that he can beat him, but it doesn't exactly work that way. So we have it to where eventually Johnny Cage lands into this very skeleton-like environment, to where we end up having Johnny Cage trying to figure out where Scorpion is, and we have it to where Scorpion is like, "Welcome!" And then like Johnny's like, "What the heck?" And he's like caught off guard, and so like Scorpion ends up like hitting him, and then like Johnny Cage just gets like thrusted in these skeletons. He's like, "Ah!" And so we end up having it to where like we have the classic things of which like Scorpion has to say. It's like, "Get over here!" And like just really great. And so we end up having it eventually to where Scorpion ends up turning into this like big flaming mess of a thing, to where eventually he like gets bursted into flame, and to where we have it to where Scorpion's head just turns into a like a Ghost Rider like skull of fire. And so we end up having Johnny Cage, who decides to take this shield thing, and he ends up like slicing Scorpion's head off, and ends up just kind of beating him that way, and so on and so forth. So moving on. So we eventually have Katana meeting up with both Liu Kang and Johnny Cage, because we have Liu Kang who has to fight Sub-Zero, and that's eventually where Katana meets up with Liu Kang. So we end up having Liu Kang having to fight Sub-Zero, and so Sub-Zero is getting like the wind up of his big attack, because we have it to where Sub-Zero like tries to attack Johnny Cage, but nothing quite works out, to where Liu Kang is reminded about the element thing that he has to remember within this fight. And so we have it to where Liu Kang cannot figure this out. And so we end up having Sub-Zero going for this wind up and of his like big icy power. And so that's when Liu Kang is like, "Oh my god, the elements, water, hey, like this guy has ice power, so there's got to be something to this." So we have it to where Liu Kang takes bizarrely this bucket of water and this like weirdest wind up looking thing that he does with flinging this bucket. And so he ends up flinging the bucket, and then the water comes out of the bucket, turns into an icicle, and then hits Sub-Zero and ends up killing him. Funny enough how, like, we've killed a boatload of these characters, but interestingly enough, a lot of them end up coming back in the sequel anyways. That doesn't make sense, but it is what it is. Like, I guess it's just like, well, hey, you can't just kill Sub-Zero and several of the other characters, because then what would be the point of the Mortal Kombat games? Everybody has to come back to life eventually at some point, right? So we have it to where Liu Kang is to rejoin up with Johnny Cage and to now have Katana. So they are to find out that Sonya does not have to accept the fight of Shang Tsung. She can decline it, and there will be no problem with that. And so we have it to where Sonya, now in a very bizarrish looking dress that Johnny Cage eventually has to compliment her on, she is to have Shang Tsung consistently saying, like, well, hey, like, Sonya, like, you have to accept my challenge. Like, I've now put the challenge up for you, so now you have to accept it. And Sonya's like, you know what? Like, I am never going to accept your challenge. Like, my friends will come for me. And then, of course, we get it to where they end up, like, taking off their monk, whatever cloak things, and they're like, well, yeah, we're already here. And I'm like, yeah, that's a pretty good surprise, I guess. So we end up having it to where Kitana mentions to Shang Tsung, it's like, well, if Sonya does not accept your challenge, like, you're not going to hook and crook this tournament. Like, it's just not going to happen that way. Shao Kahn won't accept that if you try to, like, if you try to win this tournament by a forfeit. It doesn't work that way. And so we end up having it to where Shang Tsung is like, well, okay then, well, Johnny Cage, like, I challenge you. And of course, Johnny Cage just doesn't accept it. It's like, no. So we have it to where Liu Kang is like, dude, it's obvious, bro. Like, come on, let's dance. Let's do a little dance. Because we end up having, like, Johnny Cage who's saying, like, hey, man, let's dance in this movie. I guess Liu Kang also has to say it, but I'm just saying it just for funny reasons. So we end up having Liu Kang and Shang Tsung, of course, fighting it out because story reasons. They've built this up now, it has to happen. And so we end up having these guys starting to fight, like, everywhere, to the point to where Shang Tsung ends up channeling his underworld, like, souls to have. Now, Liu Kang has to fight all of these other specialty soul characters, like a samurai and some other underworld characters that are just called, like, underworld fighters or whatever they end up being called, like a chief priest and all kinds of things. God, what do they end up getting called? The Outworld Warrior. Yeah, I think that's what they just end up being called, like, the Outworld Warriors. So we have it to where Liu Kang ends up, like, using every weapon or every attack that these people have against one another to counter all the other Outworld Warriors to take them all down, which ends up having Shang Tsung kind of running off onto this much more kind of like upper platform. And so Liu Kang ends up running after him. And so we end up having this big fight out right next to this Mortal Kombat symbol that is to end up like having these spikes coming from out of it to do this cool little design looking thing. So we end up having this moment of like, I would call it like this Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire, Green Goblin moment, where we end up having Shang Tsung trying to fight Liu Kang and nothing is quite working. So we have it to where Shang Tsung decides to trick Liu Kang, and he appears to him as Chan, to where he's saying, it's like, well, hey, like, if anything, everything's all good. Like, Shang Tsung told me to come here and and talk to you and kind of tell you that maybe you should yield and come work with us and if whoops, and everything will be fine. Good God, I got freaking scared by my own phone ringer. Jesus. So we end up having Shang Tsung as Chan, and we have it to where Liu Kang uh, is like, dude, Chan wouldn't sound this way. It's like, no, if anything, Chan died his own way, he chose his own destiny, and now I'm choosing mine. And so eventually we have it to where Shang Tsung is like, dude, I think this has gone long enough. So we end up, yeah. Happens when you get a phone call. Just all kinds of notifications going off. So I'm at the tail end of this anyway, so it's good. So we have it to where Shang Tsung is like, well, yeah, I'm going to get my upper hand on this guy and just appear as Shang Tsung and just start fighting him again. So we eventually have it to where Shang Tsung just gets outpowered. We have it to where Liu Kang's will just outbeats Shang Tsung's power, and to where we end up having it to where Liu Kang just knocks Shang Tsung onto the metal spikes to where he ends up getting his life force ends up just sucking into himself, and so we end up having all of these souls just shoot out of Shang Tsung like nobody's business. And so we have it to where all these souls just start popping out and everything like that, to where Chan has one last talking with Liu Kang to just well, hey man, you set me free and thank you for finally living up to your destiny and so on and so forth. Thank you for doing your job, basically. So we have it to where Chan is like, hey, we'll meet again one day. And so we end up having Chan going off to what we already assume heaven. And so we end up having it to where Lord Raiden's like, well, yeah, these humans just unpredictable. But it's like, hey, Lord Raiden's like, dude, we won. Yes. So we end up having it to where they have won, and so we end up having the Earthrealm champions return to Liu Kang's homeland, to where they're all celebrating that Liu Kang won, as if everybody in this whole entire world knows about Mortal Kombat, bizarrely, or this tournament. And so we end up having it to where they're all just yeah, Lord Raiden was skeptical, but he's like, you know what, I'm amazed that you guys pulled this off. And so we end up having it to where Shao Kahn is to end up arrive in this lightning and this weird bizarre effect, to where he's like, I'm gonna get you kind of thing. And we end up having to where all of a sudden Johnny Cage and Liu Kang and Sonya are all getting in their fight positions as if something is going to pop off right here and now. And Lord Raiden is like, I don't think so. To where eventually that's how the movie just ends. That's how this movie just resolves. So with that, kind of leading to the fact that there is going to be a sequel at some point. So with that said, I think it's about time to get out of here. Bye everybody. Goodbye, everybody. If there's anything that I left off, I do apologize, but otherwise I also tried as much as possible to rush through this review because I knew there was a lot of things going on with this movie. So, with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.